Hey guys, welcome back to the vanished lands. Beneath the dense veil of the jungle, where vines strangle stone and shadows outlive kings, there lies a silence heavy with secrets. Once, this silence was broken by drums that shook the earth, by voices that praised the gods, by cities that gleamed like suns across the land. The Mayan Empire was vast, brilliant, eternal, or so it seemed, and yet it vanished, not in fire, not in conquest, but in mystery. What force could erase a civilization that mastered the stars, carved mountains into temples, and bound their lives to the very rhythm of the heavens? Was it famine, war, rebellion, or something far older, hidden in the earth, the sky, and the mind itself? Tonight, you will walk through those forgotten plazas. You will hear the echoes of their voices, and you will discover that some mysteries are not lost. They are only waiting to be heard. The jungle is vast, endless, and eternal. It breathes with the rhythm of time itself, a green sea of life stretching as far as the eye can wander. At dawn, the mist curls over the canopy like a crown of ghosts, and the cries of unseen birds echo between the towering trees. Deep within this living labyrinth, where the rivers twist like silver serpents and the air itself seems heavy with secrets, there once stood an empire so magnificent, so radiant, that its memory still lingers in whispers carried by the wind. It was the empire of the Mayans, a realm where stone touched the sky, and the stars ruled the fate of kings. From the outside, their world appeared eternal. Cities of white limestone gleamed like suns in the jungle, their pyramids rising above the canopy like mountains carved by human hands. Wide plazas stretched out in perfect geometry, where thousands gathered beneath the shadow of temples to witness rituals, festivals, and sacrifices meant to bind heaven and earth together. Their cities were alive, pulsing with color and sound. Painted walls, feathered dancers, drums that thundered like the heartbeat of gods. The Mayans lived beneath the gaze of celestial order. Every star, every movement of the planets, every eclipse was studied, recorded, and woven into the rhythm of their civilization. To them, time was not a line but a cycle, a wheel forever turning. Their calendars, carved in stone, did not simply mark days. They foretold destinies. Births, wars, harvests, the rise of rulers and the fall of kingdoms. All were believed to be written in the heavens long before they came to pass. To live was to walk in harmony with the celestial order. To defy it was to invite catastrophe. Kings and queens wore crowns of jade and gold, claiming divine descent. Their bloodlines said to be chosen by the gods themselves. They were not mere rulers. They were living bridges between mortals and the divine. Their words were law, their rituals binding the fate of the people. The priests who advised them were astronomers, mathematicians, keepers of secrets so vast that even the stars seemed small compared to the weight of their knowledge. Yet within this brilliance lay a shadow. For every temple that gleamed, there was a well filled with bones. For every festival of joy, there was a sacrifice painted in crimson. The gods of the Mayans were not gentle. They were fierce, demanding, insatiable. Blood was their language, and blood was their gift. To keep the cycle in balance, hearts were offered, throats were cut, and lives were surrendered willingly and unwillingly alike. The crowd did not turn away. They believed that in death, the chosen did not vanish, but traveled to realms unseen, carrying messages to gods who kept the sun rising and the rains falling. The empire was vast, stretching across jungles, mountains, and coasts. Cities rose and fell like flames, each one competing for dominance, each one seeking to become the eternal sun at the center of all. Tikal, Kalakmul, Palenque, Copen, names whispered through time like echoes of lost thunder. They traded in obsidian, jade, cacao, feathers, salt, and honey. They wrote their histories on stone stele, carved with hieroglyphs that told stories of battles, kings, and celestial omens. Yet for all their records, there remains a silence that no carving explains, a silence that no stone remembers. In their age of glory, the Mayans conquered time itself. They measured the movement of Venus with more precision than any other civilization of their era. They built cities aligned with the solstices and equinoxes, temples where the sun cast shadows shaped like serpents descending from the heavens. They charted eclipses centuries into the future, predicting when darkness would eat the sun and when it would be reborn. For them, The cosmos was a living script, and they were its interpreters. But beneath this harmony, cracks began to form. Whispers spread in the plazas. The stars still moved, yet their meanings grew harder to read. The rains did not always come unexpected, and when they did, they often drowned the fields instead of feeding them. The maize, sacred lifeblood of the people, grew scarce. Famine prowled the villages, a hunger that no sacrifice seemed able to appease. Still, the kings declared themselves chosen. Still, the priests insisted the gods would provide. Still, the people looked to the heavens for answers. Yet the silence of the gods grew heavier with each passing year. In the heart of the jungle, travelers spoke of temples abandoned in haste, fires left burning, pottery shattered mid-meal, tools scattered as though their owners had fled in panic. Entire cities were found silent, their plazas empty, their altars cold. Birds nested in palaces where kings once sat, and jaguars prowled through courts where once thousands had gathered. It was as if the jungle itself had risen to reclaim what had been borrowed, swallowing stone and vines in silence. And yet, even in this decline, the Mayan spirit refused to vanish entirely. Survivors fled deeper into the forest, carrying their traditions, their stories, and their god with them. Villages continued, rituals endured, and though the great cities were lost, the people themselves remained. But what they carried in whispers was darker than the stones they left behind. They spoke of visions, of omens that no one dared write down. They spoke of the gods turning their faces away. Some said the collapse was punishment, a cosmic reckoning for arrogance and blood. Others claimed it was war, a kingdom consuming itself in endless rivalries. Still others whispered of something far stranger, that the stars themselves had shifted, changing the very rhythm of time, and that the Mayans had vanished not because of hunger or steel, but because their cycle had reached its end. Even today, the ruins remain, scattered like bones of giants across the jungle floor. Temples rise in silence, their steps worn by centuries of rain, their walls carved with glyphs no one fully understands. Saber trees burst through broken palaces, their roots splitting stone like fragile clay. In the sacred wells, offerings of jade, obsidian, and human remains lie preserved beneath dark waters, as though waiting for answers that never came. And so the question lingers. How can empires so vast, so brilliant, so deeply woven into the fabric of time itself, vanish as though swallowed by the earth? How could a civilization that once ruled both stars and stone simply fade into silence? The jungle keeps its secrets well. The stones do not speak. The stars remain cold and distant, but the silence itself tells a story. It is a silence heavy with mystery, heavy with the weight of 1,000 questions, heavy with the knowledge that what happened once may happen again. The Mayans call themselves the children of the sun, the people chosen to keep the cycle turning. Yet even the sun sets. Even the eternal flame can be extinguished. What remains are ruins, shadows, whispers, and as night falls over the jungle, the question remains like a ghost lingering in the dark. How can empire of eternal suns vanish, as if the jungle itself rose to devour it whole? The night sky above the Mayan world was no ordinary canvas. To their eyes, it was alive, a map drawn by the hands of gods, where every flicker of starlight was a word in a language older than time itself. High above the jungles and temples, the stars spun an eternal rhythm, guiding the seasons, the rains, the wars, and the very fate of kings. And deep within their cities, in observatories carved of stone, men in feathered cloaks and masked of jade bent their lives to studying the celestial script. They were not merely priests. They were astronomers, dreamers, guardians of a terrifying knowledge. It was said that the Mayan astronomers could read the heavens with such precision that they could foretell eclipses centuries before they came to pass. They tracked the dance of Venus, the fiery wanderer, knowing its every disappearance and return. They studied the moon's shadow, the rise and fall of constellations, and the slow crawl of the sun itself across the horizon. To the common people, these men seemed to hold the power of gods in their hands. And perhaps, in some ways, they did. But the more they looked, the more they saw things that others could not bear to know. Among the stars, they found patterns, alignments, warnings. And one such prophecy was darker than all the rest. It began quietly, with whispers among the priesthood, a secret too terrible to speak aloud in the plazas. They had seen in the heavens an alignment that foretold destruction, a curse written in fire and shadow. In the stone chambers of their observatories, beneath torches that flickered against walls covered in glyphs, the astronomers gathered in silence. They traced the movement of the heavens across painted codices, their fingers trembling as they marked the date. The prophecy did not speak of simple famine, nor drought, nor war. It spoke of collapse, an ending that would sweep across the empire like a tide of darkness, leaving only ruins where once stood temples. The rulers, when they heard it, were struck with fear. To reveal such a vision would mean panic, revolt, chaos. And so the prophecy was hidden, buried in secrecy, guarded by blood, oaths, and silence. The astronomers swore never to speak of it beyond the sacred halls. Yet even the walls of temples cannot hold back whispers forever. Rumors began to drift, carried on the breath of servants, traders, and wandering storytellers. A doom foretold, a cycle of destruction returning once more. In the great city of Tikal, where pyramids pierced the jungle canopy, the priests stood atop their temples and watched the skies with haunted eyes. Every eclipse became a terror, every red moon a reminder of what was to come. The common people noticed. They saw their priests grow gaunt, their kings more desperate in their rituals. The drums of sacrifice beat louder, more frequent, as if the blood of captives might somehow hold back the darkness written in the heavens. Children began to dream of fire raining from the sky. Farmers woke at night, convinced they had heard voices in the stars, calling them by name. Traders passing through the forest claimed to see strange lights flickering above the canopy, as though stars had fallen from their thrones and now wandered the earth. The air itself seemed heavier, as if the gods were watching more closely than before. Still, the astronomers watched. They measured, calculated, recorded, and what they saw only confirmed their terror. The alignment was real. The date was approaching. The heavens would darken, the sun would be swallowed, and blood would stain the sky. The rulers responded with fear disguised as power. They commanded larger sacrifices, grander festivals, more temples built in desperate haste. They assured the people that the gods would be appeased, that the empire was eternal, that no shadow could extinguish their sun. But their voices trembled and their eyes betrayed them. For they, too, had seen the codices, the glyphs, the prophecy etched not by mortal hands, but by the stars themselves. One night, as the moon swelled round and bright, a small group of priests climbed the tallest temple in the city. They stood in silence, their feathered cloaks rustling in the wind, as they watched the stars crawl across the heavens. Below them, the city slept, unaware that its fate hung in the balance. One of the priests carried a codex, its pages painted with glyphs in red and black, a forbidden record of the prophecy. By torchlight, they read aloud the words no king dared to hear. That the empire would fall in silence, its cities abandoned, its people scattered, its temples swallowed by vines. The prophecy was not of war, nor of conquest. It was something deeper, something cosmic, something inevitable. And as they read, a sudden wind swept across the temple, extinguishing the torch. The priests froze, their hearts pounding. From the darkness they felt it. Something watching, something vast and unseen, as though the heavens themselves had turned their gaze upon them. The prophecy spread like a hidden fire. Farmers whispered of it in the fields. Merchants muttered of it along trade routes. Even warriors spoke of it as they sharpened their obsidian blades. It was no longer a secret. It had become a shadow that stretched across the empire, growing darker with every passing night. Then came the day of eclipse. The people gathered in the plazas, their faces painted, their bodies trembling. The priests stood in their towering temples, their drums beating like thunder. All eyes turned to the heavens as the sun began to darken, its light devoured by an unseen shadow. Slowly, the world dimmed. Birds fell silent. The jungle hushed. A chill swept across the land. The priests raised their arms, chanting prayers to hold back the darkness. Blood was spilled upon the altars, running down the steps of the pyramids like rivers of fire. Yet the sun continued to vanish, swallowed piece by piece until only a ring of light remained, a burning crown in a sky gone black. Then, as if the heavens themselves wished to strike terror into every soul, The eclipse turned red. A blood-red circle hung in the sky, casting its eerie glow over temples, plazas, and forests alike. The people gasped, some falling to their knees, others crying out in terror. Mothers clutched their children. Warriors dropped their weapons. The priests trembled in silence, but they knew what this meant. The prophecy had begun. Whispers rippled through the crowd like a cold wind. The gods were angry. The end was upon them. No sacrifice, no offering, no prayer could undo what was written in the stars. The sun itself had bled, and the world would bleed with it. As the eclipse faded and the sun returned, the silence remained. No cheer, no celebration, no relief. Only the heavy weight of fear pressing down upon every heart. The blood-red sky had burned its image into their souls, a vision they would never forget. From that day forward, nothing felt the same. The air seemed darker, the jungle heavier, the silence more profound. Farmers abandoned their fields. Warriors refused to march. Even kings, once proud and commanding, grew pale and uncertain. The people looked at the priests, but the priests had no answers. They looked to the stars, but the stars only confirmed what they already knew. The cycle had turned, and their time was ending. And so, the question became not if, but when. When would the shadow fall completely? When would the empire crumble into dust? The Mayan astronomers had read the doom in the sky, and though they had tried to hide it, the heavens had revealed it to all. The blood-red eclipse had marked the beginning of the end, and the people whispered, with voices trembling in the night. The gods had spoken, and the empire of eternal suns would soon vanish into silence. The eclipse had passed, yet the sky's wound lingered in every heart. The people of the Mayan cities looked upward with fear, knowing the blood-red sun had spoken, though its language was dark and cruel. And so, as terror spread through villages and plazas, the priests and kings turned to the one power they had always trusted: the ancient rituals, the blood offerings, the ceremonies that promised to keep the gods appeased. In the great ceremonial centers, temples loomed like mountains, their steps worn smooth by countless feet. Here, beneath the shadows of towering pyramids, the rituals grew darker, more desperate. The air was heavy with incense, its smoke twisting into the sky, as if carrying the last pleas of a people who feared they had already been abandoned. The drums beat louder, their thunder echoing through the valleys, summoning both the willing and the unwilling to the altars. Masks became the symbol of these times. Masks of jade, obsidian, and painted clay. They were carved into faces of gods and spirits, worn by priests who no longer wished to show their trembling humanity. Behind the gleaming masks, their eyes were hidden, their fear disguised, their voices turned into the voices of divine. When they stood upon the temples, cloaked in feathers and gold, the people no longer saw men. They saw gods incarnate, demanding obedience, demanding sacrifice, demanding blood. At first, the offerings were as they had always been: captured warriors, slaves, prisoners taken in battle. Their screams were drowned by chants, their blood spilled upon the stone to feed the gods of sun and rain. But as the weeks turned into months and the eclipse's omen refused to fade from memory, the rituals changed. Whispers spread that the gods are hungrier now, that ordinary sacrifices no longer satisfied their wrath. And in the shadows of the temples, the priests began to offer something far more chilling: their own kin. It began with a rumor in the city of Kalakmul. A high priest, desperate to end the drought that scorched the fields, was said to have brought his own son to the altar, clad in a mask of jade. The boy was laid upon the stone, his heart cut free and raised toward the sky. The rains did come soon after, a brief storm that drenched the earth. But the people whispered with unease. Had the priest truly appeased the gods? Or had he sacrificed something far greater than life? Had he crossed a boundary that should never have been touched? Soon, other stories followed. A noble woman was seen led up the steps of a temple, her hands bound, her face hidden by a mask of turquoise. She did not cry out. Some claimed she had walked willingly, believing her blood would save her people. Others said she had been forced, her own husband offering her in a desperate bargain with the gods. Whatever the truth, her blood flowed, and the city watched in silence, their fear thick as smoke. The masks grew more elaborate, more terrifying. They no longer depicted only gods of life and fertility, but spirits of death and shadow, faces with hollow eyes and gaping mouths. Those who wore them seemed to take on their forms, their voices deeper, their movements strange, as if something beyond human guided their hands. In the plazas, the people began to bow not only to their kings, but to the masked priests, fearing that to defy them was to defy the gods themselves. Children told stories of seeing the masks move on their own, whispering in the night, their jade eyes glowing in the torchlight. Farmers claimed to see masked figures standing in the fields at dusk, watching silently before vanishing into the dark. Traders passing through the cities carried tales of entire villages where every man, woman, and child wore masks, their faces never shown again. The rituals became spectacles of terror. Whole families were led into the plazas, each wearing a mask, their identities hidden even from one another. The priests claimed this anonymity purified the sacrifice, making it more pleasing to the gods. But the people shuddered, for behind every mask could be a friend, a lover, even a child, and no one would ever know until a mask was lifted after death. In Tikal, one festival is remembered in whispers. At the height of the ceremony, the high priest stood upon the temple, his mask carved into the likeness of the sun itself. He raised his arms, and from the crowd, a masked figure was brought forth. As the sacrifice was laid upon the stone, the priest hesitated, for beneath the mask was not a captive nor a slave, but his own daughter, chosen by lot or by fate. His hands trembled, his voice faltered, but the drums beat louder, the chants rose higher, and the people demanded the offering. With a cry that was half prayer, half agony, the priest struck. The girl's blood poured down the steps, staining the stone. And from that day it was said, the priest never removed his mask again, hiding his face in shame until the day he vanished into the jungle. These stories spread like poison through the empire. The people no longer knew who to trust. Could their kings protect them? Could their priests save them? Or had the priests themselves become servants of darker powers? Some whispered that the masks no longer represented gods at all, but demons who had slipped through the veil during the eclipse. Others believed the priests had gone mad, twisting their rituals into something monstrous, blinded by fear of the prophecy. And yet, the ceremonies did not stop. If anything, they grew more frenzied, more consuming. The plazas that had once been filled with dances and songs now echoed with cries and drums. Incense choked the air, its smoke curling into strange shapes above the temples. On certain nights, witnesses swore the smoke itself formed visions. Cities crumbling, temples cracking, jungles devouring stone. Faces appeared in the haze, not human, not divine, but something else, something ancient, watching with hunger. One night, as the people gathered in the largest ceremonial center, the air thick with smoke and fear, the priests began their chants. Masks gleamed in the firelight, eyes hidden, voices echoing like thunder. The sacrifices were brought forth, their masks tied tightly, their fates sealed. As the incense rose, the smoke swirled higher, forming patterns that twisted in the torchlight. The people gasped, pointing to sky. Within the smoke they saw visions of their own cities, their own temples reduced to ruins. They saw their plazas empty, their altars broken, their palaces buried beneath vines. They saw the jungle reclaiming all, swallowing stone and blood alike. The priests froze, their voices faltering, their hands trembling. The people cried out, some in terror, others in denial. Was this a vision of the future? An omen from the gods? Or a curse unleashed by the masks themselves? As the smoke thickened, the visions grew clearer. Entire cities vanished before their eyes, dissolving into dust and silence. And then, just as suddenly, the smoke dispersed, leaving only the night sky above, cold and indifferent. The people fell into silence, their hearts heavy with dread. From that night onward, the city of masks was no longer just a name. It was a symbol of fear, of desperation, of rituals that had gone too far. The masks, once symbols of divine authority, became objects of suspicion and horror, yet the priests continued to wear them, their faces hidden, their humanity erased. And so the question grew louder in the hearts of the people. Were their priests still servants of the gods, or had they become something else entirely? The vision of ruins lingered in every mind, a prophecy carved not in stone but in smoke, a warning that the end was closer than anyone wished to believe. The jungle was waiting, the silence was waiting, and as the masks gleamed in the torchlight, the people knew that their empire was walking deeper into the shadow of its own doom. The jungle was still, but the silence was not peace. It was the silence of drought, the silence of fields left barren, the silence of mouths too dry to speak. The empire that had once thrived under the rhythm of rain and sun now stood trembling beneath skies that refused to give, crops withered in the heat, their green leaves curling into brittle husks. Wells sank into mud and dust. Rivers shrank until their beds cracked open like broken skin. The lifeblood of the people, the maize that fed both body and spirit, turned scarce and hunger grew teeth. The common folk, the farmers who had always bent their backs to feed the empire, began to murmur. They looked to their kings, who still feasted in stone palaces. They looked to their priests, who still poured blood on temple altars. And they began to ask questions no one dared speak aloud before. Why do the gods turn away? Why do they not hear our prayers? What if it is not the gods who are deaf, but the rulers who betrayed us? The whispers began in the villages, carried from mouth to mouth like embers hidden in the ashes. The gods are punishing false kings. The blood spilled upon the temples is no longer an offering, but a debt unpaid. The priests have masked themselves not to honor the gods, but to hide their lies. These whispers spread faster than fire, moving through jungles, over mountains, along trade routes, carried in the breath of starving men and desperate women. Fear gave the whispers strength. Parents could not feed their children. Hunters returned with empty hands. Fishermen cast their nets into rivers and pulled up nothing but bones of fish long dead. And in the silence of night, families sat in their huts, listening to the cries of their stomachs, and began to imagine a different future, one where kings no longer ruled, where priests no longer demanded blood, where the gods themselves could be defied. But rebellion did not roar at first. It crept. It moved in shadows. Farmers quietly refused to carry maize to the city markets. Villages stopped sending tribute to the great temples. Warriors abandoned their posts, vanishing into forests to join their families. In the plazas, the drums of sacrifice thundered, but fewer people came to watch. In the temples, the priests raised their jade masks, but fewer eyes bowed before them. The empire was being hollowed from within, like a tree eaten silently by termites. The rulers sensed it. They ordered their armies to tighten control. They sent messengers to remind villages of their duties, to demand the tribute owed, to threaten those who disobeyed. But the jungle has many secrets, and messengers do not always return from their journeys. Some were swallowed by rivers, others by animals, others by the blades of men who no longer feared the wrath of kings. It was not only hunger that fueled the rebellion, it was memory. The people remembered a time when their ancestors had lived free, when they had not been bound by temples and tribute, when the gods spoke through wind and rain, not through the mouths of men behind masks. The drought and famine did not create rebellion. They merely peeled back the fear that had kept rebellion silent. In some villages, shamans rose in defiance, declaring the great cities cursed, declaring that the priests had led the people astray. These shamans spoke in riddles and visions, but their words carried the power of desperation. They told the people that the gods had not abandoned them, but had turned their faces away from the false kings. If the people wished to survive, they must tear down the altars, smash the idols, and let the jungle reclaim the stones of empire. Rumors of villages burning temples spread. Statues of gods toppled into cenotes. Priests found wandering the countryside were stripped of their masks and sent back in shame. The rebellion did not yet march with banners, but it grew with every passing day, as silent as roots twisting beneath the soil, waiting for the moment to break the surface. In the cities, the rulers tried to drown rebellion in spectacle. Festivals were held with even greater grandeur. Sacrifices grew larger, rivers of blood flowing down temple steps. But the more desperate the rituals became, the less faith they inspired. The people watched the altars darken with sacrifice, but the rains did not return. The gods remained silent, and so the whispers grew louder. Perhaps the gods were not angry with the people. but with the kings themselves. Suspicion seeped into every corner of the empire. Neighbors eyed each other with mistrust. Servants listened at the doors of nobles. Even within the palaces, guards whispered of betrayal, wondering if their loyalty was worth the hunger in their bellies. The silence of rebellion was everywhere, pressing like a storm waiting to break. One evening, in the shadow of a saber tree, a royal messenger was found. His body swung from the branches, his tongue cut out, his hands bound in ritual knots. The saber was sacred, believed to be the tree that connected the underworld, the earth, and the heavens. To hang a messenger, there was no ordinary act of violence. It was a message written in blood and silence. The gods themselves were being called as witnesses. When word reached the palaces, fear rippled through the rulers. This was not the act of criminals. This was not the work of bandits. This was rebellion, no longer hidden in whispers, but carved into the body of a king's own servant. The silence had ended. The rebellion had spoken. But who had struck first? Was it the farmers, rising in anger against their lords? Was it the shamans, determined to tear down the temples? Or was it something older, something deeper, moving unseen to the veins of the empire, guiding the rebellion as part of the same prophecy written in the stars? The body of the messenger swayed in the wind, his lifeless eyes staring toward the horizon, as if warning of what was to come. And beneath the saber, in the shadow of roots that reached into the underworld itself, the first true mark of the empire's unraveling had been made. The silent rebellion had spoken in blood, and the kings could no longer ignore it. A messenger had been left hanging from the sacred saber tree, his tongue cut out, his hands bound in ritual knots, a sign that the whispers of revolt had taken flesh. Fear moved to the palaces like a shadow, and the rulers, desperate to reassert their power, chose the only weapon they trusted: armies. From the cities, the soldiers marched, warriors painted in black and red, their bodies decorated with symbols of jaguars, serpents, and eagles. Shields of wood and leather gleamed in the sun. Obsidian blades caught the light like shards of night. Their footsteps thundered across the plazas. Their chants shook the air, and the kings declared that rebellion would be crushed, that no village could stand against the wrath of the empire. But the jungle has never belonged to kings. The first army moved toward the rebellious villages, disappearing into green maze of trees. The warriors were disciplined, hardened, confident in their strength. Yet weeks passed, and no word returned. No messenger carried news of victory. No soldier stumbled back wounded but alive. They had vanished completely, swallowed by the silence of the forest. At first, the rulers told the people not to fear. The army was still marching, still hunting rebels, still spreading terror. But doubt crept in. Families of the soldiers waited, their eyes scanning the roads for familiar faces that never came. The plazas grew restless. And then a second army was sent. This time, it was larger, fiercer, commanded by generals who swore by their ancestors that rebellion would be crushed. They too disappeared into jungle. And again, silence followed. No victory, no defeat, only absence. Whispers spread quickly. The jungle was taking the armies. The gods themselves were leading men astray. Rebels were not enemies of flesh and bone, but spirits moving in the mist. People told stories of entire legions walking into trees and never stepping out again, of warriors marching in circles until they vanished into shadows. Some said the jungle had grown hungry and was devouring men whole. Others said the armies had been cursed, punished for spilling blood upon altars that no longer pleased the gods. A third army was raised, this one the largest yet, drawn from cities far and wide. Warriors from distant lands joined together, carrying banners of their kings, swearing vengeance for their vanished kin. They entered the jungle with drums beating and horns sounding. Days passed, then weeks, then silence once more. But this time, a few survivors returned. They stumbled into villages, gaunt, eyes wide with terror, words broken by fear. What they told was worse than silence. They spoke of strange lights flickering above the canopy, lights that moved like fire yet gave no warmth. They spoke of figures in the mist, tall and silent, their faces hidden, watching from the edges of vision. They spoke of voices calling their names in the trees, voices that sounded like their wives, their mothers, their children. Yet when they turned, there was nothing. One survivor claimed the jungle itself shifted around them, paths changing overnight, rivers flowing the wrong direction, stars hidden by clouds that never moved. Another whispered of hearing drums that were not their own, drums that beat deep in the earth, pulling them towards something unseen. They followed, helpless, until men began to vanish one by one. A hand touched his shoulder, and a warrior was gone. A shadow passed between trees, and another disappeared. No cries, no struggle, only silence. The generals tried to rally their men, but fear is a sickness that spreads faster than any wound. Warriors abandoned their posts, throwing down their weapons to flee, only to vanish into the mist. Others swore they saw their own comrades staring at them with eyes that glowed faintly, as if they no longer belonged to the living. When the survivors were asked what became of the rest, they could only shake their heads. No battlefield, no bones, no weapons. Entire legions had vanished as though erased from the world. The kings grew desperate. They ordered rituals to purify the armies before battle, offerings of blood and fire to guard them. Priests promised that the gods would protect their warriors. Yet each army sent into the jungle returned smaller or did not return at all. Villages whispered that the rebellion had been joined by forces not of this world. The masks of the priests had summoned spirits who now marched in the shadows. The ancestors themselves had risen to punish the living. Farmers told of seeing lights drifting through the trees at night, like lanterns carried by invisible hands. Hunters returned pale, saying they had stumbled upon footprints too large for men, too small for beasts. Children dreamed of masked figures standing at the edge of their huts, silent and waiting. The rebellion was no longer just men against kings. It had become a war haunted by things unseen, a struggle where soldiers marched into the jungle and were swallowed whole. One evening, near a river that wound like a serpent through the trees, a fisherman found something on the bank. It was a shield, abandoned. Its surface scorched as though touched by fire, but no ordinary fire. Its edges were blackened, yet the center bore a strange mark, a circle burned into the wood, glowing faintly as if the flames still lingered. The fisherman fled, carrying the tale to the nearest village, and from that day, the whispers grew into certainty. The jungle was not merely hiding the armies. Something within it was taking them. Something that left no bones, no blood, only silence and scorched remains. The kings could not explain it. The priests could not banish it. And the people, watching their armies vanish into shadows, began to believe that the prophecy was unfolding. The blood-red eclipse had been the warning. The masks had revealed the vision. The rebellion had spoken in silence. And now the armies themselves were being erased. The shield lay by the river, its burn mark staring upward like an eye, a silent omen of what was still to come. In the heart of the empire, while armies vanished into the jungle and rebellion whispered through villages, there lived a scribe who saw the world differently than kings and priests. His name is lost to time, for he was not a ruler, not a warrior, not a high priest. He was a quiet man, a keeper of ink and paint, a recorder of histories upon folded bark paper and carved stone. Yet sometimes, it is not the kings who preserve the truth, but the ones who sit in shadow, watching and writing, their hands guided not by power but by fear. The scribe had witnessed the omens. He had watched the eclipse darken the sun to blood. He had seen the masks grow heavier, the rituals darker, the rebellion take root. And when the armies marched into Green Labyrinth and returned no more, he understood that his empire was walking towards something far greater than famine or war. He began to write. In the stillness of night, while the city slept, the scribe lit his small torch and opened his bark paper codex. Upon its pages, he painted not the victories of kings nor the glories of temples, but the warnings he felt burning inside his chest. He carved glyphs of dread, shapes that seemed to pulse in the firelight as if alive. These were not the usual records of battles and tributes. They were visions, prophecies, whispers he believed came from the gods, or perhaps from something older, something beneath even the gods themselves. The codex told of a cycle, a wheel turning through ages, civilizations rising, each believing itself eternal, each building temples to scrape the sky, each bowing to gods with endless hunger. and then always collapse, a silence swallowing their cities, a jungle, a desert, or a sea devouring what once was great. Time was not a straight path, but a serpent that devoured its own tail, and now the Mayan people stood upon the edge of its jaws. The scribe painted the cities in brilliant color, their temples gleaming, their plazas alive. Then, on the next page, he painted them as he saw in his dreams, broken, swallowed by vines, haunted by shadows. He wrote of floods that erased entire kingdoms, of fires that fell from the sky, of stars that shifted in ways no priest had foreseen. He painted faces without eyes, crowds without mouths, armies walking into mist. At times, the glyphs seemed to guide his hand. He would wake from a trance, only to find that he had filled a page with symbols he did not remember drawing. They twisted upon the paper like serpents, curling into shapes that almost moved when the torchlight flickered. He began to fear his own work, yet he could not stop. He felt as though he were not writing but being written through, his hand merely the tool of a greater voice. Word of his hidden codex spread quietly, whispered among other scribes, carried to priests who sought control over every story told. Some called his work heresy, a betrayal of the kings and the gods. Others said it was dangerous truth, a book that should never be seen, for words of power. And these words did not describe the past. They shaped the future. Still, the scribe continued. He wrote of a time before the Mayans, of civilizations long vanished, their names forgotten, but their fates the same. He wrote of stone cities buried beneath deserts, of towers swallowed by oceans, of peoples who believed themselves chosen until the cycle closed around them. He began to believe that collapse was not punishment, nor accident, but law, a law older than the stars, a law written in the bones of the earth itself. The more he wrote, the more fear consumed him. He no longer ate with others, no longer joined festivals. He claimed to hear whispers in the smoke of incense, voices urging him to continue, voices that promised him terrible visions if he dared stop. His nights were filled with dreams of descent into darkness, into caverns where light could not reach, into places beneath the world where silence itself had weight. He recorded them all. The codex grew heavy with dread, its pages thick with paint and ash. Some said the book itself carried a presence, that those who looked upon it too long began to feel watched. One servant who caught a glimpse of its pages claimed he saw the glyphs shift and rearrange themselves while his eyes lingered. Another swore the book whispered his name, though no voice was in the chamber. The scribe kept it hidden, buried beneath stone slabs in his dwelling, bringing out only when night was deepest. But secrets cannot remain hidden forever. Priests came searching, demanding to see his work. The scribe refused. He claimed that if the codex were read aloud, it would bind the prophecy into reality, and collapse would come faster. But fear and curiosity are strong, and soon the priests forced their way into his chamber. They found him hunched over the final page, his torch nearly spent, his hands trembling as he carved the last glyph. When they demanded he stop, he looked up with eyes wild and hollow and told them it was too late. The words had already been written. The cycle could not be broken, only recorded, only remembered. The priests seized the codex. They argued among themselves whether to destroy it or seal it away. Some feared it, saying the book carried a curse, that even touching it filled their dreams with shadows. Others wished to keep it, to use it as a tool, for knowledge is power, and perhaps the codex could grant them control over fate itself. But when they opened it to the final page, they found it incomplete. The scribe had stopped mid-symbol, his brush hovering above the bark as though frozen. The rest of the page was torn, ripped violently away, leaving only a single glyph painted in red. It was a word for descent. The priests stared in silence. None dared speak the meaning aloud, for descent could mean many things. Descent into darkness, descent into madness, descent into the underworld, or perhaps descent of the gods themselves, returning not as saviors, but as executioners of the cycle. The scribe, his strength gone, collapsed where he sat. His final words, whispered with the last of his breath, were not recorded, for none could agree on what they heard. Some claimed he spoke of fire falling from the heavens. Others said he spoke of silence deeper than death. And a few swore he simply laughed, a hollow sound that echoed through the chamber until the torch went out. The codex was hidden again, sealed in a chamber deep within a temple, its location known only to the highest priests. They believed they had contained its danger, locked its prophecy away from the eyes of men. But secrets carved in ink are like seeds buried in soil. In time, they grow. In time, they are found. And still, the torn page haunts the story. Where did it go? Who tore it? Was it stolen? Carried away by one who feared its truth or one who desired its power? Some say the page traveled far beyond the empire, carried across oceans, its single glyph copied into other scripts, its meaning disguised but never lost. Others believe it vanished into the jungle, waiting to be uncovered when the cycle turns again. What is known is this: the word remained, descent, a word that carries away the entire empire, a word that lingers like a shadow across centuries. For in descent, there's both fall and return. To descend is to be swallowed, but also to journey somewhere else, into darkness, into silence, into the place where the cycle waits to begin anew. The codex was never meant to be read by many, yet even the priests who tried to bury it could not unsee what they had glimpsed. They carried its dread into their rituals, their masks heavier than before, their chants filled with desperation. And the people, sensing their fear, knew without words that the end was no longer a whisper. It was a storm gathering above them, a descent already begun. The empire of eternal suns had once stood in defiance of time itself. Stone temples touched the sky. Plazas thundered with the drums of ritual. Kings and priests commanded the voices of thousands. But empires are not eternal, no matter how brightly they burn. And when their fire falters, something older waits patiently to claim what was taken. The jungle does not rush. It has no need for haste. It waits, silent and patient, until stone weakens, until walls crack, until roots find the smallest opening. Then it moves, slow but relentless, creeping forward with vines that coil like serpents, trees that grow taller than towers, roots that shatter stone like fragile bone. It began quietly, with cracks in the temples, moss spreading across carved glyphs, small trees sprouting from the tops of walls where birds had left seeds. Priests and kings still commanded sacrifices, still chanted to the gods, but the jungle had begun to weave its claim over the cities. In the silence after rituals, vines reached higher. In the shadows between ceremonies, the roots deepened. The jungle was watching, waiting. The plazas that had once held thousands began to empty. Families fled, carrying only what they could hold. Some left because of famine, some because of war, some because they no longer trusted the priests who were behind jade masks. Others fled because they had seen too much: the omens and smoke, the armies that vanished, the glyph of descent in the forbidden codex. They walked into the forest, hoping to find safer ground. Behind them, their homes fell silent, and silence is the jungle's invitation. In those abandoned plazas, footsteps began to echo, though no one remained. Travelers claimed that when they passed by, they heard the sound of markets alive, voices bargaining, children laughing. Yet when they stepped inside the plazas, they found only emptiness. No merchants, no children, only weeds growing through cracked stone. The voices faded into the air, leaving only the rustle of leaves. Stone gods, once painted with brilliant colors, began to fade and crack. Their eyes were blinded by moss, their mouths silenced by vines. Faces that once demanded worship were now broken, their features split by roots that reached deep into the earth. Some villagers said the gods themselves had grown tired of being honored with blood, that they had turned into trees and vines, disguising themselves within the jungle so that they could no longer be summoned. Stories spread of travelers entering cities that were still alive, only to see them vanish overnight. A caravan might arrive to find temples gleaming and smoke rising from hearths. Yet when they returned the next day, the city was gone, its plaza swallowed by earth, its temples split apart, its houses buried under roots, not destroyed in battle, not burned by fire, but as though the ground itself had opened to devour it. One trader told of arriving at a city with golden banners flying from its towers. He spent the night in a plaza where a dancer performed, and priests offered incense. But at dawn, when he awoke, the banners were gone. The plaza was empty. The dancers were shadows. The incense smoke a memory. Where once stood a city, there was only jungle, thick and unbroken. He fled, never to return. The jungle seemed to grow stronger the weaker the people became. Drought starred the maize fields, but vines flourished. Wells dried to dust, but rivers cut new paths through the earth. The silence of abandoned homes became filled with birdsong and the cries of jaguars. Every loss for the Mayans was a gain for the jungle, and in time, the balance shifted. Priests tried to resist. They declared new rituals, demanded more sacrifices, and commanded that the vines be cut, the roots burned. For a time, the plazas were cleared, the temples freed. But by night, the jungle returned, thicker than before, as if mocking the effort. A wall torn down by human hands takes years to rebuild, but a wall claimed by the jungle vanishes in days. Fear grew heavier. People began to believe the jungle was no longer just earth and plant, but a spirit, a living god reclaiming its throne. Some called it the oldest of gods, one that had existed before temples, before kings, before the first stone was ever carved. They said the jungle had allowed the cities to rise, had watched them flourish, and now, having grown weary of their arrogance, had decided to erase them. There were those who resisted, warriors who marched into the forest with fire, determined to cut it back. Few returned. Those who did spoke of strange things, paths that circled back to where they began, trees that seemed to move when not watched, lights drifting through the leaves. Some swore they heard voices calling from the canopy, voices of their ancestors, urging them to leave. The rebellion, once fueled by hunger and silence, found new strength in these beliefs. Shamans declared the jungle to be their ally, the true god who would punish the kings. They claimed the vines and roots were not enemies but protectors, that the cities must be surrendered to green, so that the people could live free once more. And slowly, the people listened. They stopped resisting the jungle's advance. They stopped cutting the vines, stopped burning the roots. Some even began to worship it, offering food at the base of trees, whispering prayers into the leaves. The jungle had become not only their devourer, but their sanctuary. Yet the jungle is not gentle. Even to those who worship it, travelers continued to vanish. Caravans entered the forest and never emerged. Entire villages disappeared without a trace, as though the trees themselves had opened their arms to take them in. One tale tells of a caravan of merchants traveling with goods of jade and obsidian. They reached the city at dusk, its plaza still alive with faint firelight. They camped nearby, waiting for morning to trade. But when dawn broke, the city was gone. Not abandoned, not ruined, but gone. Its temples vanished, its plazas replaced with trees, its roads buried in undergrowth. The merchants searched, but they found nothing, not even broken stone. It was as if the city had never existed. They returned in terror, swearing they had seen it with their own eyes, swearing the jungle had dragged it underground in a single night. And their story spread, carried across the empire, feeding the growing belief that the cycle had entered its final stage. The jungle was no longer creeping. It was devouring. From city to city, the pattern repeated. Walls cracked, plazas emptied, temples fell silent. The kings still clung to their thrones, still demanded tribute, still raised their voices in denial. But the people no longer believed. Their eyes had turned to the forest, and they knew their rulers could not stop it. And so, one by one, the cities of the Mayan Empire were surrendered, not to conquerors, not to war, but to the patient, silent, eternal hunger of a jungle. The Mayans called them the sacred wells, the cenotes, vast mouths of the earth filled with water so deep that no torchlight could ever touch their bottom. They were portals, not merely wells. To drink from them was to share the lifeblood of the gods. To cast offerings into their depths was to speak directly to the underworld. For centuries, the cenotes have been holy places, centers of life and of faith. But as the empire crumbled, as drought scorched the fields and rebellion shook the plazas, the cenotes turned from blessings into curses. At first, the offerings behaved strangely. Gold, jade, obsidian, shells, even blood, all were cast into the waters as they had always been. But the priests began to notice something unnatural. The offerings no longer sank. Jade floated. Feathers drifted back to the surface. Bones bobbed like driftwood. Even when heavy stones were thrown, the waters would sometimes push them back, spitting them onto the shore as if the cenote had grown unwilling to receive the gifts. The people watched in terror. If the sacred wells rejected their offerings, what did it mean? Had the gods closed their mouths? Had the spirits of the underworld risen in refusal? Some priests declared it was a test. Others whispered in secret that it was a sign of rejection, that the gods no longer listened. Still, sacrifices continued. Captives were thrown alive into the waters, their bodies sinking into blackness. Yet even here, something was wrong. Divers, sent down with ropes to retrieve sacred relics, returned pale and trembling. They claimed that as they descended, the waters whispered their names. Voices, soft and familiar, called to them from below. Some heard their mothers, some their children, some their lovers long dead. The divers said the voices pulled at them, dragging them deeper, promising warmth and comfort if only they would let go. Not all of them returned. One diver, the strongest of them all, was lowered into the cenote before a crowd of priests and villagers. He disappeared into the dark, the rope uncoiling. At first, there was silence. Then, suddenly he screamed, not in pain, but in joy. "I see them," he cried. "They are waiting for me." The rope snapped taut, pulled by a force unseen. The men on the shore tried to haul him up, but the rope burned their hands, pulling downward with unnatural strength. Then it went slack. When they pulled it up, it was frayed, cut as though by sharp blades. The diver was gone. His body never surfaced. From that day forward, fewer were willing to approach the cenotes. But fear has a way of binding men more tightly than devotion. Priests declared that greater sacrifices were needed to appease the waters. Not only captives, not only criminals, but chosen ones, children, virgins, even members of noble families. And so, the cenotes grew darker still. The ceremonies were vast. Drums thundered as processions led the chosen to the edge of the waters. Masks of jade hid their faces. Garlands of flowers adorned their heads. Incense smoke curled into the sky. The priests sang as the chosen were lowered or cast into the depths. But the crowds who watched no longer felt certain they were giving gifts to the gods. They felt as if they were feeding something else. Stories spread of what happened beneath the waters. Some said the chosen were not devoured but transformed, their bodies rising as shadows swimming just below the surface. Others said the waters were doorways, carrying souls into other realms. And some whispered that the chosen did not die at all, that they lingered, their laughter and cries echoing through the depths, haunting the cenotes forever. One child in particular is remembered in whispers. She was young, too young for such a fate, but the priest declared her pure, her blood a worthy gift. Her parents wept as she was dressed in white, her face painted blue, the color of sacrifice. Before the crowd, she was lowered slowly into the waters, her eyes wide, her voice silent. The surface rippled, then swallowed her whole. The people waited. The priest chanted. The waters stilled. She did not return. But days later, her laughter was heard, not beneath the surface, not echoing in the depths, but above the well. Soft at first, like the laughter of a child playing, then louder, carrying through the air, filling the plaza with eerie joy. Mothers clutched their children, men fell to their knees, priests froze in terror. The laughter did not fade. It circled the well, drifting like wind, until finally it dissolved into silence. The cenote was no longer sacred. It was cursed. From then on, no one trusted the wells. Some villages filled them with stones, sealing their mouths. Others abandoned them, refusing to draw water even in thirst. But the cenotes did not forgive abandonment. Those who sealed them claimed to hear scratching in the night, as if hands clawed from below. Those who abandoned them heard whispers follow them through the forest, voices calling their names, urging them back. Travelers told of seeing faces in the water, faces of the sacrifice staring upward with empty eyes, mouths moving without sound. Some swore they saw hands reaching from the depths, grasping at the air before vanishing again. The priests tried to regain control, declaring the cenotes still holy, that the voices were simply the gods testing their faith. But even they trembled when approaching the waters. Even they knew something older than gods had taken hold. For the cenotes were not mere wells. They were entrances to the underworld, mouths of the earth that opened into caverns below. And as the empire collapsed above, the darkness below grew restless. The offerings had awakened something. The sacrifices had fed it. And now, the waters themselves seemed alive, rejecting gifts they no longer wanted, claiming lives they did not ask for, laughing with voices that did not belong to the living. The people began to fear not only the jungle, not only famine or rebellion, but the very earth beneath their feet. For the cenotes had turned against them. Then the underworld itself had risen, hungry and unappeased. And so, the curse of cenotes spread across the empire, its laughter echoing to the silence of abandoned cities. The cenotes had turned against them. The jungle had swallowed their cities, and whispers of rebellion lingered in every village. The Mayan world stood trembling, its temples cracking, its priests trembling behind jade masks. Yet, in the midst of this unraveling, a new story began to spread. It was not a tale of drought or famine, nor of omens written in stars. It was of strangers, pale, alien, arriving by sea, bearing weapons no one had ever seen. Along the coast, fishermen told of ships unlike any they had known. The Mayans were masters of canoes, vessels carved from saber trees, gliding swift across rivers and coasts. But these ships were different. They were giants, wooden beasts with wings of cloth that caught the wind, carrying them swiftly across waters where no canoe dare venture. Some said they came from beyond the horizon, a place no Mayan map had ever drawn. The first sightings were brief. A ship would appear at dawn, pale figures standing on its decks. They were tall, their skin light like bleached bone, their eyes glinting like obsidian. Some claimed their hair shone like fire. Others said it was a color of ash. In their hands, they carried weapons that gleamed like lightning, blades of steel unlike the obsidian edges the Mayans knew. But what made the fishermen tremble most was the fire. The strangers carried it in tubes that roared like thunder, spitting flames that struck from afar. One arrow of fire could pierce a warrior's shield, could shatter stone, could kill with a sound that echoed like the sky itself breaking. And then, just as suddenly as they appeared, they vanished. No battles were fought. No treaties were made. The strangers did not march into the jungles or demand tribute. They came, they lingered on the shore, and they disappeared, leaving behind no bodies, no camps, only fear. The people asked, were they gods? Had the sea itself spat out spirits to judge them? Some priests declared them omens, the embodiment of wrath sent to punish a dying empire. Others whispered that they were the descendants of those sacrificed to the cenotes, returned to the underworld not as shadows, but as pale wanderers of the sea. Yet the strangest thing was what they left behind. In one coastal village, after the strangers vanished, fishermen found a blade unlike any they had ever seen. Not obsidian, not jade, but steel, smooth, gleaming, strong enough to cut stone without shattering. The blade was engraved with symbols no Mayan I could read, curves and lines foreign to their world. The priests seized it, declaring it dangerous, but the villagers whispered of its power. They said it hummed faintly at night, as if alive. In another place, a mask was discovered. Not jade, not painted clay, but metal, dark and cold, carved into a face without eyes. When placed upon the head, the wearer claimed to see lights flickering far out at sea, even when no ship was present. He tore it off in terror, and the mask was hidden deep within a temple. The survivors of these encounters grew restless. They swore they had seen more than just men. They claimed figures moved with them, tall shadows walking upon the water itself, their forms shifting like smoke. Some said these shadows had no faces, only voids where eyes should be. But perhaps the strangest tale came from a child. She claimed she had spoken with one of the strangers. While others hid, she approached the pale figure who knelt in the sand, his eyes strange and sad. He placed a hand upon her shoulder and spoke, not in Mayan words, but in a tongue she somehow understood. "The cycle turns," he said, "as it always has." Then he returned to the ship, which vanished beyond the horizon. When the girl told the priests, they silenced her. But her words spread anyway, carried like wildfire. The strangers knew of the cycle. They knew of the prophecy, and if they had come from beyond the horizon, then perhaps they had seen it before in other lands with other peoples. The fear deepened, for the cycle was not only theirs. If collapse came to all civilizations, then the empire of eternal suns was not unique. It was simply next. One day, after the strangers had not been seen for months, a group of explorers ventured into the ruins of a coastal temple abandoned in haste. Inside, they found carvings freshly etched into the stone. Carvings that did not match Mayan style. They depicted ships with vast sails, figures in armor, and fire raining from the sky. The explorers fled, swearing the carvings glowed faintly, as if burning themselves into the stone. Among the ruins, buried beneath fallen blocks, they found a jade mask. But unlike others, this one bore an engraving on it inside, a mark that chilled even the bravest. It was a ship with sails stretched wide, carved in a style no Mayan hand had ever made. Beneath it was a single glyph, not Mayan, not known. And those who studied it swore the glyph was not a word, but a warning. When the mask was shown in the city, the priests tried to hide it. They declared it false, the work of rebels. But the people knew the truth. The strangers had come, they had left their marks, and their ships carried a destiny too powerful to ignore. The story ends with silence, for no ship was seen again for centuries. No pale strangers walked the shores. The sea returned to its endless rhythm, waves breaking on sand, tides rising and falling. But the mask remained, hidden in shadow, its ship engraved as though waiting for the day it would sail again. And the people whispered, in fear and wonder, who were the strangers? From what lands did they come? And why had they vanished, leaving only fire, steel, and a ship carved into jade? The jungle had reclaimed the plazas. The cenotes had turned to curses, and strangers in the sea had vanished like ghosts. Yet in the end, it was not the drought, not the hunger, not the rebellions, nor the jungle that delivered the final blow. It was something more insidious, something that moved not through stone or soil, but through the fragile depths of the human mind. They called it no name at first. It spread quietly, like a shadow passing through dreams. Survivors whispered that it began with visions, dreams of burning skies, of rain that never ceased, of cities drowned in floods of fire and water. Those who dreamed woke trembling, unable to eat, unable to speak of what they had seen. Yet as days passed, the dreams returned deeper and darker, and then the dreams became waking. Men and women began to wander the streets at night, eyes open, lips moving with words no one understood. Families woke to find their kin standing at the door, staring into the distance as if waiting for someone to arrive. Others woke to find them gone altogether. Doors left open, meals left untouched, blankets thrown aside. Entire households vanished between dusk and dawn, as if pulled by unseen hands into the night. The plazas echoed with silence. Markets stood with food half-traded, tools abandoned mid-work, fires still burning, but no one to tend them. The empire was dissolving, not in war, not in blood, but in absence. The priests tried to explain it. They declared the people bewitched, cursed by rebellious spirits, or punished by gods. They ordered rituals of cleansing, demanded greater sacrifices, but the altars did nothing. The dreams continued, and soon, even the priests themselves were not spared. One was found walking the temple steps at midnight, his mask still upon his face, his hands dripping with blood he could not explain. Another was found scratching symbols into stone with his own fingernails until they split and bled. He claimed he was writing what he had seen in his dream. A sky falling in shards, a serpent swallowing the sun. But the glyphs he carved were not Mayan. They were shapes no one recognized. Symbols that seemed to ride in the torchlight. The madness spread like wind. Some resisted it for days, even weeks, but few could withstand its weight. Those who did not dream were haunted by whispers in waking hours, voices calling their names from shadows, voices that belonged to their dead. A mother swore she heard her lost child laugh from within a tree hollow. A farmer claimed his ancestors stood at the edge of the field, beckoning him with open arms. When he followed, he never returned. Fear gave birth to suspicion. Villagers accused one another of bringing the curse, of harboring demons in their dreams. Families turned upon themselves. Fathers tied their sons to posts to prevent them from wandering in the night. Wives watched their husbands sleep with knives clutched in hand. But nothing stopped it, for even bound, even guarded, the afflicted were taken. One moment alive, the next gone, leaving only ropes cut as if by unseen blades. And still, the dreams deepened. Those who spoke of them described endless rain falling upon cities already aflame. Skies torn open to reveal blackness behind the stars. Rivers flowing not with water, but with blood. And always, in every dream, a voice that promised an end, a release, a return. It was this voice that gave the plague its true power. It did not simply haunt. It called. Whole villages emptied in silence. Their people walking into jungle in the dead of night, never to return. Trails of footprints were found, leading into forests where no path had ever been cut, only to vanish as if the earth itself had swallowed them. Hunters who followed returned pale and broken, claiming they had seen lines of people walking deeper into trees, their faces blank, their eyes unseeing, their lips whispering in unison. The words were always the same, though none dared repeat them. And so the empire began to collapse, not with battle cries, but with footsteps fading into silence. The few who resisted told of strange gatherings at the cenotes. They claimed that those who had been called returned to the cursed wells, standing upon their edges, gazing into the depths as if waiting for something to rise. Some leapt willingly into the waters, their bodies never resurfacing. Others stood frozen until dawn, their eyes fixed on the black water, before turning and walking away into the jungle. Where they went, no one knew. The rulers could not control it. Their armies were gone, their priests afflicted, their people vanishing like smoke. In their desperation, they attempted to burn the villages touched by the plague. But fire only left ruins, not answers. And when the wind changed, the flames seemed to whisper too, carrying the same call. Soon, even the greatest cities fell. Plazas once filled with dancers and drums echoed with empty wind. Palaces stood open, their feasts half-eaten, their thrones abandoned. Glyphs were left unfinished, tools still in the hands of vanished scribes. The silence was everywhere, heavier than stone, heavier than death. In time, travelers stumbled upon these places, hoping to find survivors, hoping to find food. But what they found was worse than emptiness. They found the marks of dreams carved into walls, spirals and shapes drawn with charcoal, with blood, with fingers. They found masks abandoned in rows, as if their wearers had removed them in unison before vanishing. They found footprints leading out of the city, always toward the jungle, always toward silence. And then came the final horror. A wanderer was found days later, far from the cities, stumbling through the forest. His body was gaunt, his eyes wide, his lips cracked with thirst. When the villagers brought him water, he drank greedily, but when they asked where it come from, he only shook his head. When they asked what he had seen, he trembled, and when they asked why so many had vanished, he whispered a single phrase again and again until his voice broke. We were called back. No more could be taken from him. He wandered the village in silence for a day, then vanished in the night, leaving only his words behind. And those words became the last whisper of a dying empire. The empire was in ruins. Armies had vanished into the jungle. Families had walked away in silence, their homes left behind as though abandoned mid-breath. The cenotes had turned to curses. The strangers in the sea had disappeared like omens swallowed by waves, and the Mayan plague had hollowed the cities from within. Where once there had been thunder of drums, laughter of festivals, and cries of sacrifice, now there was only the endless whisper of the wind through empty plazas. Yet in one city, still standing though its walls were cracked and its temples strangled by vines, the priests gathered. They had watched the cycle unfold, each omen burning into their souls like fire. They had seen the prophecy in the stars, in smoke, in blood. And now, with their people gone and their cities collapsing into the embrace of the jungle, they prepared for their final act. It was not an act of defiance nor surrender. It was something older, a ritual meant not for the living, but for the cycle itself. The temple chosen was the greatest of them all, rising higher than the forest canopy, its steps steep and worn by centuries of pilgrims. At its summit stood a chamber where the gods were said to walk among men, where the sun aligned perfectly on sacred days, where time itself seemed to pause. The priests declared it the last refuge, the final bridge between earth and sky. And so they gathered there, the last council, masked and robed, carrying torches and drums. They locked themselves inside. For 3 days, the city watched, or what little remained of the city, the scattered few who still lingered in fear and hunger. They saw smoke rise from the top of the temple, smelled incense thick upon the air. They heard the low beat of drums, steady as a heartbeat, echoing across the plazas. Day and night, the drums did not cease. The sound carried into the jungle, into the empty streets, into the ears of those who dared remain. Whispers spread. Some believed the priests were calling upon the gods one final time, begging for salvation. Others believed they were sealing the curse, binding the cycle so that no one could escape. And some said they were not speaking to the gods at all, but to something else, something that had walked beside them in massive jade and had now come to claim its due. On the 4th night, the drums grew louder. The rhythm quickened, like thunder rolling across the heavens. The earth seemed to tremble with each strike. The few who still remained in the city huddled in silence, eyes wide, hearts racing. They said the sound was not only heard but felt in the bones, shaking them from within. And then silence. The drums stopped. The smoke faded. The torches within the chamber burned no more. The people waited, but no priest emerged. Not that night, not the next, not ever. The temple stood sealed. Some brave men climbed its steps, hoping to open the chamber. But when they reached the summit, they found the doors heavy as mountains, sealed from within. No sound came from beyond them. No movement stirred. The last council had vanished into their own ritual, leaving nothing but silence. The city emptied soon after. Fear had broken even the strongest. Families who had resisted hunger and rebellion could no longer resist the silence of the last temple. They fled into the jungle, never to return. The temple remained alone, rising above the canopy like a tombstone, its locked chamber holding secrets too heavy for time to reveal. Centuries passed. The jungle claimed the city, as it had claimed all others. Vines strangled the walls, roots split the plazas, moss covered the steps, birds nested in the cracks, jaguars prowled in the shadows. The temple stood still, its doors sealed, its silence unbroken. Travelers avoided it, fearing the weight of the curse. Some said the drums could still be heard on certain nights, faint in the distance, beating through the mist. And so it stood, forgotten, until centuries later, when explorers, drawn by whispers of lost cities, stumbled upon the ruins. They marveled at the temple. Its steps were steep, its walls still strong despite the grasp of the jungle. They climbed, carrying tools and torches, determined to enter the sealed chamber. It took days to pry open the ancient doors, their weight resisting every strike. When at last they cracked open, the explorers expected bones, masks, relics of gold and jade, perhaps even the remains of the last priests who had locked themselves inside. But they found nothing. The chamber was empty. No bodies, no offerings, no altars, only dust and silence. It was as if no one had ever been there at all. The walls bore no carvings, no glyphs, no sign of ritual. The floor was bare, save for faint marks, as though something heavy had once been dragged across it and vanished. The air was heavy, thick with a scent that was not decay but something stranger, like incense that had never faded. Smoke that still lingered centuries after the last flame. The explorers searched every corner, but nothing revealed itself. And yet, as they prepared to leave, one of them swore he heard something. A faint sound, almost too soft to notice. It was a drumbeat, slow, distant, echoing from beneath the stone. They left in silence, never to return. And the temple remains, alone, sealed by time, haunted by silence, holding within it the mystery of the last council. Were they consumed by their own ritual? Did they ascend, as they claimed, to the realm of gods? Or did they vanish, like the armies, like the families, like the empire itself? Swallowed by the cycle, erased from time? The jungle offers no answers. The stones do not speak. Only the silence remains. And when night falls and the wind carries strange echoes through the trees, Some still claim they hear the faint, distant sound of drums. Today, the jungle is silent, but it is not empty. Beneath the endless green canopy, among the roots of saber trees and the shadows of jaguars, the ruins of the Mayan world still stand. Pyramids rise like broken teeth of the foliage. Plazas lie hidden beneath layers of earth, and temples, cracked and eroded, remain watchful, their stone faces staring blankly into eternity. The jungle does not destroy, it preserves. And in its silence, the past lingers, waiting. Archaeologists who walk among the ruins speak of a strange stillness, as if the air itself remembers. They find fragments of pottery, carved steely, jade beads buried in the soil. They uncover bones, many bearing strange markings. Cuts too precise to be war wounds, burns too sharp to be fire. Some skeletons lie sprawled in plazas, as if struck down suddenly. Others are carefully placed in circles, hands folded, faces turned upward as if awaiting something. But what unsettles them most are the discoveries that should not exist. Tools of impossible design, obsidian blades sharper than steel, masks carved with techniques unknown to the time, inscriptions that do not match any known Mayan script, symbols coiled like serpents, etched into stone, speaking of things that even scholars cannot translate. They do not read as words, but as warnings. One carving, found deep in a collapsed temple, depicts a wheel turning endlessly. Around it are cities rising and falling, flames consuming towers, waves swallowing coasts. At its center, a figure with no face, arms outstretched, pulling each city into the circle of collapse. Beneath it, a phrase carved in Mayan glyphs. The cycle returns. Another inscription, found on the walls of sacred cenote, warns of descent, not into water, but into darkness beyond it. The glyph is the same as the one found in the Forbidden Codex. Descent. Always descent. Scholars argue over its meaning. Is it metaphor? A myth of the underworld? Or is it something else? A truth too large for modern eyes to see? The jungle holds its secrets well, but not all remain hidden. Travelers speak of unease within the ruins. Some claim to hear footsteps in plazas that should be empty. Whispers in languages no one understands. The faint beating of drums on nights when the air grows heavy. Others swear they see lights moving through the trees, faint and distant, vanishing when followed. One explorer, resting by a ruined temple, awoke to find fresh footprints in the dust around him. They were small, as if made by children, yet no one else was near. Another swore that in the cenote at Chichen Itza, he saw a face rise just beneath the water's surface. Painted blue, eyes open, mouth moving with words he could not hear, before dissolving into ripples. And then there are the masks. Many lie buried, unearthed by diggers, their jade still gleaming after centuries. But some are found in places too strange to explain. A mask left upon a stone altar with no carvings nearby, as if placed there recently. A mask found upright in a cave, staring toward the entrance, though the cave had been sealed for 1,000 years. And the most haunting, a mask discovered in a temple chamber that had no entrance at all. The walls were unbroken, the ceiling sealed, yet the mask lay in the center of the floor, waiting. The scholars debate, the archaeologists argue, the scientists measure, but none can answer the question that has haunted the world for centuries. How could an empire so vast, so brilliant, vanish without trace of war, without signs of famine, leaving behind only silence? Perhaps the answer is not in what was lost, but in what remains. For the Mayans spoke always of cycles. Time was not a line to them, but a circle, an endless wheel of creation and destruction. The empire rose, flourished, and fell not by chance, but because the wheel demanded it. And if that is true, then collapse was not the end. It was only the turning of the cycle, the descent into silence before the rise once more. Some whisper that the Mayans never truly vanished. They did not starve, they did not flee, they did not die. They were called back, called into the cycle, into the jungle, into the cenotes, into the silence. They went where we cannot follow, into a realm beneath time, waiting for the wheel to turn again. The ruins that remain are not tombstones. They are markers, reminders, warnings. The stone cities are not dead. They are sleeping, their echoes preserved in the roots and rivers, their masks watching for the moment return. And if the cycle turns as the Mayans believed, then silence is only temporary. One day, when the wheel completes its turn, the jungle may release its hold. The plazas may fill again with footsteps, the temples with smoke and drums. The voices of priests may rise once more, the masks lifted, the sacrifices renewed. Already, some claim to hear them. A faint drumbeat in the distance, a whisper carried on the wind, a flicker of light in the trees. Already, some say the cycle stirs. The final echo of the empire is not silence. It is a promise, and it is a chilling one, that the Mayans may not have vanished at all. They may have simply gone where we cannot follow. And one day, when the cycle turns, they may return. Even now, the ruins lie beneath the jungle, silent yet watchful, as if waiting for the wheel to turn again. The Mayans left behind no answers, only echoes. Echoes carved in stone, buried in cenotes, whispered by the wind to forgotten plazas. Were they consumed by famine, rebellion, or shadows from the stars? Or did they simply step into a place beyond our reach, where time bends and silence becomes eternity? Perhaps the truth is not lost. Perhaps it is only hidden, waiting for those willing to look deeper, to listen longer, to follow the whispers of civilizations that vanished overnight. If this journey stirred something within you, if the mystery still lingers in your mind and the silence of the jungle still echoes in your heart, then let it not end here. There are countless more forgotten worlds, cursed lands, and forbidden places, each carrying secrets just as strange, just as haunting, just as unforgettable. So, step closer to the fire. Join us where history and legend meet, where myth breathes again, and where the past still speaks. Like this story, share it with those who wonder. Leave your thoughts and comments, and subscribe so you never miss the next echo of time. The ruins may be silent, but the story is far from over.